bit less. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to talk about storytelling, and storytelling is a big word that sounds fancy, but I think very often we don't really know what it means. So today we're going to see a little bit what it means. And the first question is, why should you care about storytelling, right? We're scientists, we're not novelists or Steven Spielberg. Well, the first reason why stories are important is because they create vivid emotions. And what you want is to engage your readers. Yes, we're scientists. And yes, we care for truth, we care for precision, we care for thoroughness and evidence, but we are also human beings. And the people who are reading our articles are also human beings. So as such, they have certain features that makes their attention work in a certain way. And what we care about as human beings is emotions, and stories create vivid emotions. And yes, we're doing science, we're not doing something that feels very emotional, but we do experience as scientists many emotions, right? I mean, we can be very excited by certain research, we can worry about certain states of the world if we see all the topics around global warming at the moment. That creates very strong emotions as well. And our curiosity is also part of our emotions. And this is what stories do. They elicit emotion in us. I don't know if some of you have seen Dancer in the Dark. It's not the most recent movies, maybe for the youngest one. You haven't seen it, but it was a very emotional movie. And I seen it when I was, the beginning of my PhD thesis, so decades ago. And I remember having been with colleagues, with PhD students, other PhD students, we went to see these movies. And the movie tells a very dramatic story. It's with Björk. And I think like 20 or 30 minutes into the movie, one of my colleagues went out because he felt like unwell, really. He thought he had to go to the toilet. And I think an hour into the movie, we were all covered in tears because the film was so emotional. So this is the power of stories. We were not in the situation in which Björk was in the movie, but that created so strong emotion in us that I will never forget this experience. The next thing with stories is that they capture attention. Each time we put things in the format of a story, we tend to be drawn to them. And what they also do is that they help us take the perspective of the narrator or of the main characters. This is a research by Uri Hassan and his group, and what they have done is that they have asked people to tell a story of their lives. And while they were telling these stories, the participant of this experiment, or one of the participants of this experiment, was scanned with neuroimaging methods, with fMRI. And so they measure the activity of this person's brain. And afterwards, they played the story told in the scanner by this person, the story. I think he was telling something that happened, something important that happened in their lives. And the people who listened to it while being in the scanner demonstrated very similar brain activity. So the authors of this research, Uri Hassan and his colleague, call it brain-to-brain coupling. What happens when people tell a story, and when we identify with the characters of this story with the person telling the story, our brain starts to mimic the brain of the person. So, and finally, we remember stories better. There is a lot of research that shows that each time things are put in the form of the story, we tend to remember better the details of it. And I would not be surprised if tomorrow I ask you what you remember from this talk, that maybe the Dancer in the Dark, you will remember the Dancer in the Dark story or something like that, way more than any other information. That's just how it is. And this is what we want as scientists. We want people to care about what we tell them. We want them to be interested. We want them to pay attention. And we want them to remember our messages. Okay, now I would like to do an exercise with you. I would like you to think about the story of a movie, of a book, or a fairy tale you have seen or read. It shouldn't be a documentary. It doesn't have to be recent. I know that mostly nowadays we tend to watch series on Netflix. But just think about, maybe a movie that you really like, and I would like you to take a piece of paper, or maybe you can do that on your computer, and write the main element of the story. And I would like you guys also who are at the office or at home, I don't know where you are, to do the same thing, because if you do this exercise, you will also remember better everything that we're going to talk about today, so you will really benefit in the most. So please take a few minutes to remember a story and to write down the main elements of this story in the same order it was told in the original piece. So not starting interpreting, just telling the way it happens in a movie, okay? Like the main events. Okay, so I don't know if you're finished, but we're going to see. So here I also wrote a story. For sure, it's a story that most of you know. Once upon a time, there was a sweet girl named Cinderella. She lived with her mean stepmother and her two proud stepsisters. They made her do all the housework. She had to wake up each morning when it was still dark and cold to start a fire. It was she who cooked the meals and kept the fire going. She was always covered in ashes and cinders, and so she was named Cinderella. One day the prince invited all the girls in the kingdom to a ball in his castle. Everyone, including the two stepsisters, was very excited. Cinderella too wanted to go to the ball, but her sisters asked her to stay at home and work. Cinderella was so disappointed that she began to cry. Suddenly, she saw shimmering light in the room, and a woman with a kind smile stood in front of her. She was Cinderella's fairy godmother who wanted to help her go to the ball. With a wave of her hand, she created a grand carriage and made Cinderella look like a princess. The fairy godmother wanted her to be home before midnight, for then the spell would be broken. Cinderella was the prettiest at the ball. Her stepsisters didn't even recognize her. All the other girls were jealous because the prince danced with her the whole night. However, the moment the clock struck midnight, she remembered her fairy godmother's words and ran away. In a hurry, she left her glass slipper on the castle steps. The prince had fallen in love with her and wanted to find her and marry her. He asked his men to go to every house in the land and find the girl whose foot fitted into the glass slipper. The king's men reached Cinderella's house. The two stepsisters tried hard to get their big feet to fit into the slippers, but in vain. Finally, Cinderella tried the slipper and her foot fit perfectly. The prince married Cinderella in a grand ceremony, and the mean stepsisters never bothered her again. So that's the story of Cinderella, and what I would like you now to tell me is what kind of structure do you see in this story? You have also written a story, you've also picked a story. Is there a certain structure that you can recognize in your story and that you can recognize in this story? How does it start, for example?
Person, like in this case Cinderella, who is in a rather disadvantageous situation, so she has to do all the work and the duties and doesn't really get anything out of it. And like her stepsisters are like the villains or the enemies, so to say, who are in her way of, let's say, happiness. And then she overcomes that obstacle. In this case, by like in a very passive way, because she doesn't really overcome the obstacle, but is made overcome the obstacle. And then there's a happy end.
Okay. So what are the elements of this structure that you just described? What is the first thing that is described in this story? Yeah? Yeah, exactly. So some kind of background information. This is what we call the opening, right? It starts with an opening on the character and setting. We see it's a girl, her name, and she lives with her stepmother and two proud stepsisters. That's the context. Then what happens? We have this character and
a little bit of like what happened in the past.
What happened in the past, okay, and
Background story.
So that's the beginning, right? I mean, or yeah, also the situation. There is a problem, exactly. Huh? So the next thing is that there is a problem or challenge. She lives this unhappy life. There are these mean people around her, and she has to do all the work, and she doesn't have any time to rest. What happens next? An elaboration on the topic, yes. And what else?
Highlighted one event that happened.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
One event that happened is highlighted. So there was a ball. And
yeah.
So now it's all about the ball and how she figures out how to go to the ball because she wanted to go to the ball.
Okay, so she wants to go to the ball. There is this event. In which way this event serves the story?
It's an approach to the challenge.
Exactly. Right? It's an action to solve the challenge in a way. She doesn't want to be this girl anymore who stays at home. She also wants to enjoy her life. So there is this whole ball situation, and this is the action that is made to solve the challenge. Then comes, I mean, probably many of you have seen also the Disney cartoon. Then comes what? Also think about the Disney cartoon. Yes, so there is a result of the action. And what else? How would you call it?
Kind of a conclusion.
So then comes a conclusion. And usually, what happens just before the conclusion is that we have a climax scene. It's a very intense scene. So here it's this situation, I don't know if you remember, but in the Disney cartoon, she's locked in her room, and the mean stepsister discovered that she's the girl that the prince wants to marry, and they don't want her to get married, so they locked her in her room, and she hears everything that happens, and she cannot be part of it. She cannot tell who she is. And so it's a very intense scene. And if you have kids, or if you have kids around, it's very interesting to see the kids when they're watching this climax scene, because they get very excited. They get very intense for them, even in a cartoon. When I was a kid, I loved the Three Little Pigs, the story of the Three Little Pigs. And I've always wanted my mom to play. I had a vinyl disc. And I always asked my mom, play me the disc. But at the moment when the wolf gets into the chimney to get to in the last house, in the break house, I would each time start to scream as hell. And my mom had to come and stop the disc. And then I would cool down a little bit and say, again. So that's the climax scene, right? That was so intense. And usually after the climax scene, we have this resolution, right? Everything is fine. The prince marries Cinderella in a grand ceremony, and the mean stepsister never bothered her again. The challenge is really closed. Now, in which way do you think? So I just want to ask you, does that fit also the structure of the story that you guys wrote? Do you see this structure? Yeah, most of you? So usually this is a structure that you will find in most movies. And if you don't find it, it's usually very confusing. So if you like new wave films, French new wave film from the 60s, you will not find the structure. But it could be that you will not also manage to go till the end of the movie. Or you have also some directors who play with the structure. We kind of mix the different elements to make it a little bit confusing and interesting. But otherwise, you have this structure in every kind of story. It's really a structure that we recognize when there is something missing. Also, we recognize that there is a missing element. Once I remember I was watching a movie and there was no challenge. And it was a movie with, I don't remember the name of the actor, but it doesn't matter. And so they were in a family and they were going on holidays and they were just having a holiday. And there was no challenge and it was so awkward. So I was waiting for the challenge to happen. And in the middle of the movie, I realized there is no challenge to come. And I thought I had to stop the movie. It was too weird. So we know this structure, and this is something that's very important, and especially the challenge is so very important. Two different elements are really essential in the structure. The first one is the opening, is the character and setting, because you're not going to tell an exciting movie, an exciting story, if you don't have an exciting character. Right. That's the reason why famous actors look good and are charismatic, because they need to grasp our attention, otherwise we're gone. So you need to have an interesting character. And once you have an interesting character, an interesting setting, then you need to have an interesting challenge. What happens in a story is that the challenge creates a tension in the reader. There is something happening. We don't know how it's going to end up. Is she going to remain in this miserable situation, or is she going to be able to get out of it? And this creates a tension in us. This creates an imbalance in us, and we want this tension to be resolved. And that's the reason why we keep on watching the movie. So once I was watching a movie like that, and I was quite taken by the challenge, but the action was very slow, very long. And what I did something I'm not very proud of. I just fast forwarded the whole movie to get to the climax scene, to get to resolution, because I wanted to know if the girl would be fine, but I didn't want to watch the whole movie. So that's the kind of challenge that we want, right? We want people to want to know how it's going to end up, and but of course we also want them to be interested by the action. Now, in which sense does this structure also is relevant for scientific papers? What do you guys think? Can we find such a structure in scientific articles, and what would be what then? The opening is introduction. Mm-hmm. So the challenge is also in the introduction. What would that be in the introduction? The research question, right?
How you choose your headings. But
yeah.
It's in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Present the research question. Then the research you did, which would be the action.
So the research that we perform is the action. Mm-hmm.
The results are then probably the climax. Maybe?
The results are the climax, yes. And the resolution is the discussion and the conclusion. Yes, absolutely. So actually, in our papers, we are also telling a story. We all also have these different elements. This is what makes our research. So this is a figurative representation of the structure of a scientific paper. Usually it has these 4 different elements called the IMRAD structure, starting with the introduction, the material and method, the results, and the discussion. And what is useful to know if you want to write a scientific paper is that there is absolute or very little place for randomness in how we structure our papers. Our papers are usually structured in a very specific way, but interestingly, I think many people don't know about this structure. I didn't know about the structure for very long, and after having spent years struggling to write my papers, I discovered it, and I discovered it's actually not that complicated to write a good paper. The introduction starts usually with the research topic. The research topic is what the research is about. I don't know. What is your research about?
Neurogenetics, so the brain, cognitive science, and genetics, so DNA sequencing.
Okay, and what are you interested in? So neurogenetics, brain and cognitive science, and genetics. And what are you interested exactly in your research?
So what are the changes in the DNA which causes these changes, or which are the changes in the DNA which makes the brain prone for these changes, or how it is affecting the cognitive abilities?
Okay, so the influence of DNA on cognitive abilities. Do I understand right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, there are different ways to tell a story, but if I understand correctly, your research is about cognitive abilities, and you want to see what determines cognitive abilities. Yeah. With a focus on genetics, yeah. So we could say that on a broad level, your topic would be cognitive abilities and the factors that influence cognitive abilities, and if we make it a little bit more specific, the influence of genetics on cognitive abilities, right? So that's your research topic. And probably papers in your field start by explaining why it's important. So usually the first paragraph of a scientific paper starts by explaining the research topic and its importance. And I don't know, in your case, could be recent research have shown that genetics play a huge role in cognitive abilities, maybe give a certain percentage of things like that. And then the next paragraphs are going to usually describe a niche. A niche is something that is a little bit more specific. So your topic now is very broad. What are you especially interested in the influence of genetics on cognitive abilities?
Basically, the different biomarkers, which we could, if it could be the biomarkers for the cognitive decline in the aging.
Okay, so
different parts of the DNA. So if I could say like some genes and variations in the genes, or some telomere length and stuff like that. So where we can actually predict or use as a marker instead of going for the clinical phenotypes, you have like genotypes from where we could predict.
Okay. So, what's your name? Piyush. Piyush. So what Piyush was just saying is that he's interested in how biomarkers and especially elements of the telomeres, so genetic markers in the telomeres, can predict aging and decline of cognitive abilities in aging, right? So this is your specific niche in this big topic, and for sure there has been already some research on this question, and this is going to be your niche. So probably in the rest of the, or a big part of your introduction will be devoted to explaining what has been shown on this different topic, on this topic. But then there is a problem that still remains. Okay, what is the problem that is still remains for you?
It's not still clear how it is affecting it, or does it involve in the cognitive abilities, or like, for example, let's say the telomere length, is it really a marker of the aging-related phenotype, which is in this case it would be the cognitive abilities.
Okay, so yeah. So if I understand correctly, what Yosh is saying is that it's not very clear. There is some evidence that would suggest that telomeres play a role, but this evidence is contested. There may be arguments against the fact that telomeres really play a role and can be used as a biomarker to predict cognitive decline during aging. So this is the problem, and you're going to bring, your research is bringing a solution to this problem. Yeah, that's the hypothesis. Yeah. So, yeah, so you come with a theory, you come with an experimental research maybe, where you're going to test this hypothesis and that this is true, that we can use telomeres as a biomarker, and in a way that would exclude alternative interpretations. So this is the story that you're telling in the introduction. And then you have the material and methods and the result. And so this structure that we find in the introduction, this is something that you will find in many different areas. It's something that is found like most of the time, more or less. It's more or less long. In some papers, it's going to be 1 paragraph for each point. In some papers, it's going to be 2 paragraphs for all the points. If you publish in Science or Nature, then you're going to tell this story very compressed. In other articles, you're going to tell this story like in 10 or 15 paragraphs even, but you will find something around these lines. And sometimes what happens also is that at the end of the introduction, you will introduce the methods. It's especially true if you're addressing an audience who may not know the methods, so you want to explain them. Or maybe in your case, the method is especially important because you're going to use a new method in comparison to what has been done before, and this method may be more accurate to make the point that you're trying to make. So, yeah, so this is these are the different elements that compose the introduction. And then we have the material and methods, and we have the results. And the structure of the material and method and results are very dependent on the kind of research that we're doing. So I am working, for example, so I'm a psychologist, and I'm working with people, so I will describe my sample, my procedure, the material I use, and if I do some fancy statistics, I will describe my analytical approach in the methods. Maybe I'm going to divide also my results in different sections. But if you're in a very different field, then maybe your method section will be structured differently, or your result section will be structured differently. If you're not really sure about how to structure your method and result section, the best is to find examples that are similar, people who have done very similar research as yours, and to look how they structure these 2 parts, because it's often quite standardized. And then we have the discussion, and the discussion starts with, most of the time, with a recap of the research question and of the main results. In your example, for example, that would be there is lots of there is evidence that suggests that telomeres would be an excellent good biomarker to predict cognitive aging, but this evidence has been challenged over the last years. In the present article, we have used a new methods to test this hypothesis, and our results show this and that. And then we're going to put these results in relation with the previous literature. We're going to try to embed them, see is it in line with what has been found before? Is there something that may be surprising? How does that fit with it? Maybe we're going to describe limitation for future studies, and then we're going to wrap it up with a conclusion. What you can see is that the discussion is an answer to the introduction. It follows not perfectly, but there is a form of symmetry between the introduction and the discussion. And so we finished the introduction with an introduction to the method and the hypothesis, and we start the discussion with a recap of the research question of the hypothesis maybe and the main result. Then we had described our problems and the niche, and when we put our results in relation with previous literature, what we're doing is that we're putting them back in a niche. We're trying to see how does that fit in with previous literature? How does it enrich also this field of research? And finally, we started our paper very broadly with the broad research topic, and we're going to finish also very broadly with the conclusion. What we're doing here is that we're very much telling a story. So our introduction starts with the research topic, and the research topic, well, this is our character. This is our main character. So Yao's character is maybe cognitive aging. Mina, I know her because we work together. Character is self-control. I don't know, what is your character?
Consumer, I guess, I study economics.
Okay, consumer behavior. So that would be consumer behavior. So this is what the research is about. This is really the character that's going to drive the action. And the niche is the context in which this character evolves, what we already know about this character. And then we have a problem, which is the challenge. We have an action, which is indeed the solution that we bring to the challenge and the way we're going to test this challenge using our experiments or our studies. We have a climax. This is our results. And in the same way as the climax of a story can be emotional, we know that discovering our results is also a very emotional part of it, right? At least for us, when we open our data and we look if we have verified our hypothesis, it's usually... And the resolution is the discussion, okay? What is the abstract? Well, the abstract is the trailer of our story. It's all these different elements, but in 1 or 2 sentences, okay? And a good abstract should tell the whole story. So this is the kind of trailer, you know, these trailers that tell you the whole story. Like sometimes they even tell you the end. I really don't get it, because I'm not going to movies to watch a movie where I already know how it finishes. But for some reason, it seems that it's a thing. And in science, it's important because we're not so much playing the suspense. We want things to be clear. We want that it's round, that it's understandable, that people know what they get. And so we need to tell them the whole story. So what we do in an abstract is that we have 1 sentence maybe about the opening, what it is about, the challenge, the action, the climax, and the resolution. So, and you may have noticed that I presented the structure of scientific papers in the shape of an hourglass. Do you have any idea why? Yeah?
The length of each part, so introduction and discussion is the same amount of text, and the middle part is the same amount, and yeah, how it's structured.
So the length of each part, there is more, the introduction is longer than, and the discussion are longer than the middle part. Yeah, it could be, but it's not the reason. Anyone else would have an idea? Yeah? So it's about the time you spend on each part. Yeah, probably it's proportional. Yes, that's true. But that was not the reason. the reason why I presented it in this way, and you will find also in many books in this way, is because it's because we start broadly. We start with this big research topic. It's a broad topic. We get more narrow, describing the niche, the content of our research, the precise hypothesis. So it's something that's very specific. The middle is very specific also. The material and method, the results are very specific. That's the reason why it's often easier to write them, right? Because it's quite specific. We don't have to come with big concepts and complex ideas. And then in the discussion, we start narrowly, and then we broaden up again. Okay? What I want to draw your attention to is this form of symmetry between the introduction and the discussion. What happens is that in the introduction, we create an expectations in our reader. We're giving them the beginning of the story. We give them the challenge. And we tell them this is about, this paper is about this research topic. And we have this problem, and this is how we're going to resolve it. And what we do in the discussion is that we answer directly to each of these different points, so that we fulfill the expectation of the readers. To wrap it up. And what happens sometimes is that the introduction and discussions are not very well balanced. So we start very broadly, but then we finish the discussion very narrowly. For example, we start talking about the influence of genetics on cognitive abilities, and we finish talking just about aging. And this doesn't leave a very good feeling in the reader. What happens sometimes is we start very narrowly and we finish very broadly. We start very narrowly talking about aging and cognitive impairment related to age. But then we finish like very broadly. And then people are going to be a little bit lost, right? Because we've started, we tell them it's about that, and now we're talking about something new. So what we want to give is that we want to give our readers a round experience. We want them to be fulfilled, like they go out of the movie and they're happy. Everything that has been, every door that has been opened has been closed. It's clear now where we are. This structure is called the OCA structure, but I want to point your attention to the fact, because I know that some of you maybe also are writing grant proposals, and to the fact that it's not always the structure. You have different forms of structures. So OCAR is for opening, challenge, action, climax, and resolution. There is also a structure, it's called LDR structure, and that starts with a lead. So you have a short introduction. So it's like smaller formats. In the past, Science and Nature used to have these formats. Now they're a little bit more structured, but we can still find that, like sometimes within one paragraph, you will have everything that, like the characters, the setting, and the challenge. And then you have the middle, which is the development, which is a mix of methods, results, and visual illustrations. I think Science and Nature papers are a very good example of that, because the visual illustrations are usually very important, and you go through the different experiments quite quickly. And then you have just a conclusion, like the end is very short. You have also another structure which is called ABDCE structure, and there what you do, it's often the case with grant proposals, is that you start with a short summary of the methods and results, maybe of an example. So you have a first paragraph where you say, in this grant proposal, we're going to test the hypothesis of this and that, and we're going to use this method. And then you start again with your introduction, with your background, development, climax, ending. And so these are different structures, but what all the structures have in common is that they all tell a story. They all have all these different elements. You cannot really skip an element. So the big question is how to find your story, because it sounds easy, and when we describe it, and when we read fairy tales, and when we watch movies, it sounds obvious, but when we sit in front of our computers, it's another story. So how to do that? The way I work with it is that I've designed 6 questions that will help you find your story. You can use these questions if you answer 1 or 2 sentences to each of these questions. You have the abstract of your paper. And these questions, the first question is, what is the topic of your research? Why is it important? What is your research about? For example, Mina and I are working on self-control, and here we would answer the topic of our research is self-control. Self-control is essential in many areas of life, whether it's academia, whether it's health, whether it's social relationships. We need self-control. That's why it's important. The next question is, which problem does your research address and why is this problem important? And here I would encourage you to try to formulate your research question as a problem. Why? Because we human beings have something that's called the negativity bias, and we tend to pay more attention to negative information. We tend to pay more attention to problems. And when things are formulated in terms of problems, that draws our attention. We don't like it. We want to solve it. So it can be also a method. It's not like 100% thing. Sometimes it can work also differently, but it can be a method to interest your readers by explaining that we have a problem, that yes, that would be wonderful to use telomeres as a biomarker of aging, and we could use that in many areas of life, and we can help people whom we know are at risk. We could maybe give preventive treatment, or I don't know what we could do. The problem, we would have a wonderful method, but the problem we don't know if this method really works. So then I'm just like, I want to know. Please, Yush, I'm giving you money. Please do the research. So we need to also explain why this problem is important. Then we explain which solution. The next question is, which solution do you bring to this problem? What are your hypotheses, if you have any hypotheses? Which study did you perform to test this hypothesis? What did you find? And what did you learn from these results? And here again, why is it important? If you answer each of these questions, well, you have, in the first questions, this is your opening in characters and settings. The second question is the description of your challenge. The two next questions are about the action. The fifth question is the climax, and the last question is the resolution. And then you have your complete story in this question. So you can really use that as ask yourself these questions and put that and use that as the abstract of your research. And this is there that you will have the core of your story. Of course, you can do that once you've done the research and you want to write a paper or you want to present it at a conference. But my advice would be to start very early on when you're thinking about the research, because storytelling is more than just giving a nice package to your research. It's the essence of your research. And there is no good research without a good story. There is no good research on a topic that's not important. There is no good research on a problem that's not important. So if you're doing a research and you cannot explain why it's important, maybe that you should change your topic or your challenge. So being very clear of the core of your research. The story is actually the core of your research. And if you're clear about the core of your research, then you will know what to put in your paper, because everything that you will put in your paper will serve your story. It will bring your story one step further. So that's what I wanted to tell you. If you're interested in this kind of topics, I invite you to go to my blog. It's called brilliantmind.blog. I put loads of, so you will find Ultimate Guide to Scientific Writing, where I explain also everything, all that I just explained. You can see it here. So all the different elements I was talking about and even more elements you will find on the blog. The network is working quite slowly. So, yeah. And what you can do also is that you can subscribe to my newsletter and you will receive a scientific writing package where you will find a template that you can use as the draft of your paper already formatted according to the APA norm, and a workbook to write your introduction, also based on these elements I was just describing, based on this element of storytelling. You will also find, you will also register to my newsletter. I send regularly tips to be more productive writers, to be more productive scientists, to deal with all the challenges that we encounter as scientists. You can use the QR code here to go to the page and register to the newsletter. So that's what I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for your attention and for also helping me with this presentation. And I'm very happy to answer any question if you have.